Hello everyone and welcome to Surrey Police Live. Each week we've been highlighting the work we do at Surrey Police, and this week we'll be looking at modern slavery. My name is Detective Chief Inspector Kerry Lovelace and I'm the Surrey Police Strategic Lead for modern slavery, human trafficking and organised immigration crime, and I'm also the South East Regional Lead for those same subjects. The key points we'll be covering tonight include what is modern slavery and the different examples of it, signs to look out for, how victims can seek help and how other people can help suspected victims. We'll be answering questions at the end, so please submit them in the comments as we go, either on Facebook or on YouTube. There might be an area you want to know more about or something we've said that you don't quite understand, so just pop it in below and we'll get to as many as we can. So I'd now like to introduce my guests. DS Martin Linton.
How you doing? I'm DS Martin Linton. I work out of Staines. I support the DCI as the tactical lead on the same portfolio for modern slavery.
Thank you. Inspector James White.
Hello, my name's James White. I'm the Borough Commander for Runnymede, leading the Specialist Neighbourhood team, working with partner agencies and charities to tackle problems in the borough, and also the North Division's lead for modern slavery.
Thank you. And Debbie.
Hi, thanks ever so much for inviting me along today. My name's Debbie Lloyd. I'm the Operational Coordinator for Justice and Care, which is the Victim Navigator programme supporting victims of modern day slavery.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. So I think we probably best start off with considering what is modern slavery. Now this could be a whole range of exploitative practices whereby a person is forcibly or coercively controlled so that someone exploiting them can benefit from their work. In relation to what is modern slavery, we've got a short video for you now that highlights a few examples of what this could look like. So just to recap for you then, modern slavery can include forced labour, debt bondage, domestic servitude, sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation and trafficking. So I've got some questions now. The first question, so I'll open that to the panel. What are the most common types of modern slavery in the UK?
I don't know. I mean, I would suggest from a policing perspective, obviously you come across a lot of things like sexual exploitation. So if you're looking at brothels or street workers, you also come across a lot of labour exploitation in car washes and nail bars. And we also see the criminal side of exploitation when you look at cannabis grows and things like that. Martin, I mean, obviously that's where your field is.
For me, I think the big one at the moment is drug supply and exploitation that goes with that. I think it doesn't matter where you are in the country, regardless of the size of your force, every day there are repeated incidents of that. That links into a whole world of criminality, weapons carrying, serious violence and whatever. I think that the sexual exploitation, particularly around brothels, is massively underreported. We do see a lot of it, but I think the scale is a hell of a lot bigger. But like you say, there are other elements of exploitation, again, massively underreported, the car washes, and I think a lot of that is down to people's lack of understanding.
Okay, thank you. So I think the picture in Surrey in relation to the trends we're seeing here really is the same, I would say, probably nationally. So predominantly for us it's criminal exploitation, which obviously Martin's touched on. We sometimes refer to that as county lines, which is another name for talking about that drug dealing across different parts of the country and across different parts of the county. So that would be most common in Surrey. We do see quite a lot of labour exploitation and domestic servitude as well. That would be next for us in terms of what we see. And then obviously Martin's touched there on the sexual exploitation. So the national picture isn't very different to what's happening in Surrey, but there are variations between different areas and different forces depending on their depending on their geography. So so one of the examples of modern slavery that might commonly come to mind is human trafficking. We've now got a short video here talking about the reality of being trafficked from the perspective of the victim.
Me and my sister came here from Bangladesh to live with my cousin. We call him Uncle. It was scary because we didn't speak any English. Our uncle told us if we did anything wrong or we complained, that social services would come and take us away and we would never see our mother again. We didn't know how to explain ourselves or who to trust. It's hard when you can't trust your own family. Our uncle made us work in the house, and if we didn't work, we didn't get any food. One of the most traumatising things we went through was when my uncle would sexually abuse my sister. She tried to get help. She spoke to the doctor. The doctor sent a letter with organisations that could help her. I didn't understand. The teacher called Childline, but they weren't able to help. Maybe it's because my sister couldn't speak for herself, but she was depressed and had no confidence. In the end, I managed to get help. When we first arrived at the foster care, we were in shock. The fear and the anxiety was almost too much to bear. And the whole situation has left us with big emotional scars that we will carry for a long time.
So one of the questions that we often get asked is how does trafficking people differ from smuggling people? And they are quite two distinct things. So when we talk about trafficking people, that can actually be just the movement of people for the purpose of exploitation. So sometimes that can be between different countries, but it can be within the same country, even within the same county. And quite often the people will have been forced into doing that or coerced, or they will be unaware really for the purposes of which they're being moved. So very often a lack of consent in relation to travelling. The difference with smuggling is that people are complicit in that. So that is very much an example of bringing people across country borders for the purposes of either claiming asylum or making a new life in another country. So we don't tend to look at smuggling in quite the same way, and it would be difficult to say that they would be victims in the true sense of the word, because they have often consented to the smuggling which they are actually involved in. So that's the difference between the two. In relation to why people are trafficked, again, something which we often get asked, it's for the purposes of exploitation, and that usually is financial. There's also actually financial rewards to be had from the actual trafficking process itself, so it can be extremely lucrative in terms of that sense. The types of exploitation are different, but there's normally a financial element, either in terms of making money or saving money by the conditions that somebody is forced to work in. So hopefully that's helpful in relation to those questions. I'd just like to ask Martin now to talk a little bit to us about Operation Hibernia, which is an investigation that he's been leading on, and the work that he's been doing and his team to combat this.
Thank you. So this is an investigation into trafficking, sexual exploitation, and it's led on to a multitude of other offences: organised theft, high value fraud, money laundering, assault, sexual offences. So although the principle, you're looking at trafficking, you do consider several other criminal offences that have taken place. Now, this came about from community intelligence. There was reports of ultimately what was a brothel in operation within a block of flats. And when we executed the warrant there, we found a lady who had been trafficked and made to work for certain individuals. I can't go too much into it because obviously it's still a live case, but suffice to say, the investigation has spanned 5 or 6 different forces within the UK. There's been overseas work that's taken place and overseas arrests that have taken place. We've recovered significant sums of money, which we are able to retain. The money trail is into the hundreds of thousands that we haven't been able to locate because it's been sent elsewhere. And that investigation has progressed to a point where we have 100 plus females who've been exploited for sexual purposes. And, it's only possible down to the bravery really of people speaking out about their treatment that's led to that happening. But that was a new development in an area of Surrey in one flat, and the sad reality is that is happening all over the country, and it's happening right in your area. For me, we're 2 years down the line. We have made some significant progress. It hasn't been without personal cost. These investigations really are tough. So I think that we can only deal with this sort of thing if people are telling us what's happening. So.
Okay, thanks, Martin. So just before we move on to signs of modern slavery, we've got a question from Kathy on Facebook, and she's asking us, are you confident about stopping county lines? I think we would all say that would be a really huge ask.
A really huge ask. I think there's, from our point of view, from Justice and Care and that victim identification, part of our role is supporting the police in actually identifying victims from offenders. It's a really complex issue where young people are groomed and coerced into running drugs. And it's very difficult for police officers to make that judgment call at that point where they're stood in front of maybe a 17-year-old who's carrying drugs as to, is this person an offender or is this person a victim? And you have to look at the whole context behind that individual as to why they've got themselves into that situation. Police forces across the country are working super, super hard to try and manage the issues around county lines. There's all sorts of divert projects, whether that be police involvement or with NGOs or other organisations, to try and support people and identify those children that are most at risk. I'd love to say I think there is a future to be able to stop it, but you've got to... the old adage is, isn't it, you have to cut the head off the snake. So we've got to go to the very top end of how those lines are developing, and that isn't maybe the runners that we see on a local level. It's the people much further up the chain, and how that becomes then involved in organised crime and what that then looks like on a much bigger scale.
I think what the important thing is, people will often say, well, what are the police doing? I think it's a much wider issue. This is not a single agency issue. This is definitely a multi-agency approach that is needed, because why are people running those drugs? I've dealt with people, in fact, a case that still haunts me now, a guy who was running drugs, and he was exploited, and he was stabbed 11 times, left for dead. And when you actually look at how he fell into that, there's quite a sad story really. Came to the country, couldn't speak English, couldn't write, was unemployable, had no qualifications, house with poverty, 6 siblings in there, and needless to say, he ended up falling into crime to be able to just try and afford clothes. Now, he was supposed to be earning £500 a week. He hadn't been paid for 10 months. The clothes he was living in, he was just a mess. He was not earning the money. The people earning the money were higher up. And I think we're going to be careful not to go down into the drug sort of argument there, but I think we're better off targeting demand which would then ultimately reduce supply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important, I think, to point out, isn't it, that actually county lines is part of organised crime.
Yeah.
We're talking about sophisticated networks of people who are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make money from other people, to make money from drugs, from weapons, from gang violence, all of those kind of things. And obviously as a police service and as partners of the police service, bearing in mind that we face demand from lots of different places in terms of trying to prioritise risk and vulnerability and trying to protect people, it's really, really difficult. But I think it's a conversation that's had all the time. There's huge amounts of focus on it, both in the police service and with partners. And I think every year that goes by, I think we're working harder and better to understand this more, and also relying on the public to help us identify these young or vulnerable people who are open to exploitation.
It has to be a community approach. It has to be a multi-agency community approach to deal with it.
Yeah, and picking up on Martin's point earlier, the information that we get from the public is the key to that, because it's the start of that journey. We've got fantastic intelligence teams who develop that intelligence and proactive teams who can then respond to that. But it all starts with that information that comes from the public ultimately.
And I think sometimes another complicating factor is that at that particular point in their life, people don't often realise they're a victim of exploitation, because obviously you touched there, Debbie, on the grooming element of it. People do feel that they have perhaps more control over their own destiny than they actually do, and until they get to a point where they're in so far, they then feel that they can't ask for help, or they don't know of a way back because potentially what they've done in the intervening period. So it's really complicated to suggest to somebody who doesn't feel they're a victim that perhaps they are. There is their need for that recognition themselves, to be able to then bring that help forward. So that can be really, really difficult as a service. You want to help someone, you can see they need helping, but because they don't see it themselves, it's really difficult.
Well, that self-identification goes across the board, even outside of county lines. When you look at modern slavery, you know, in general, part of the issue with the identification for police forces of victims is the fact that the victim doesn't identify as a victim themselves for numerous reasons. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, hopefully, Kathy, that's helped you answer your question. So we're just going to move on, I think, now to signs of modern slavery. So we've talked about what modern slavery is, and obviously they're just some of the struggles that victims face. We want to talk about what we can all do to help. We've now got a clip highlighting a few of the signs that might indicate that somebody is a victim. So I think now what we like to do is explain to members of the public what some of the signs are that they should look out for. So, Debbie, could I ask you to help us with that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in your day-to-day lives, we will be seeing people all around us that are probably being exploited one way or another, whether that be a minimum wage or whether it be a more serious, not that minimum wage isn't serious, but more serious type of exploitation. From nail bars to car washes, people that don't have maybe proper equipment, people in nail bars. If you're in a nail bar, and so many ladies now have their nails done, you know, that you need to be able to have a conversation with that individual across the table from you that is doing your nails. And it needs to feel comfortable, that they're talking freely, that there's nobody watching over them. that you can pay either by a card or by cash, but that it isn't just cash only and that has to go to a specific person. And the same with the car washes. If you're only paying £3 or £4 to have your car washed, those workers aren't being paid properly, are they? No. And if you look around the car wash and nobody's got proper welly boots on or gloves or that sort of protective equipment, it's not right. We need as a society to say we need to pay more for some services, and that then cuts out that type of exploitation. I think in relation to brothels, like we were talking about earlier on, if you live in a block of flats or in a house and you can see sort of people coming and going or condoms at the end of the driveway and things like that, please tell the police and they can then do some work around that to try and help people. And also, as we saw, I think we've got a film coming up, if you see something that just doesn't sit right, there isn't a police officer in the land that is going to say, you're wasting my time. You have to just say, this isn't right, there's something wrong with this, and have the courage to say, this doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
I think on that, so you touched on the brothels there, and it's only because I've dealt with something recently. There was somebody who was using the services of a brothel, let's say, who actually rang police and said, this isn't right. I've been in here, this situation is not normal. I didn't ask what normal was, but he called in with concerns, which turned out to be legitimate. And we talk about drug supply where someone will ring one telephone, which could be anywhere in the country, and then they're met by a runner who's directed from wherever. The same thing is with brothel activity. Things I've found with investigations are, people are directed from somebody else, either the pimp or the abuser, whoever. And I think that whilst we're talking about what to look for, we are going to have people who are using brothels who may think now, hang on a minute, this isn't quite right. And for a sign there would be, well, you're not the person I spoke to on the phone. You're not the person in the picture that's advertised on the internet that I've looked at. Those sorts of things can be signs as well. It's an unpleasant subject to talk about, but some people don't understand that, so that's why I add that.
Yeah, and back on the kind of the county lines things that we discussed, it could just be as simple as young people walking around an area looking unfamiliar, looking lost, perhaps dressed in clothing that looks dishevelled to indicate they may have travelled a long distance or aren't being kind of funded appropriately. So for members of the public who are out, those are also signs which would be key to hear.
Yeah, and I would say that I have personal experience of that in a previous role in a previous county where we've had young people turn up outside what is essentially a local police station, so a beat house police station rather than a mainstream police building, and literally looking completely lost. They've been put on a train from somewhere to Southampton, which is where I was working at the time, and as you say, they've perhaps spent a week living in a crack house in the same clothes, too frightened to do anything about it. Very oftentimes carrying sort of terrifying selection of weapons, which you just wouldn't expect, for a young person. So that's absolutely something I've encountered, and often what sits behind that in my personal experience has been threats to the family, which we know as adults are very unlikely, that somebody's watching your house 24 hours a day, but when you're 14, you've got yourself into some trouble and someone says to you, if you don't do this, we're coming after your family, people believe that, and so it's terrifying, for the young people, particularly, in relation to county lines and other types of exploitation. The fear is immense, I would say. So okay, great, thank you. So next, we just wanted to think about some advice for business owners, really. Is there anything that they can pay particular attention to? I'm guessing when, they have people come into their public-facing businesses, so perhaps shops, takeaways, taxis, doctor surgeries, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, the signs that we've just discussed to keep an eye out for those locations. So taxi companies perhaps taking round victims or exploiters, fast food restaurants. Those are places where we, as the local neighbourhood team, we go to those businesses and we try and educate on those signs to look out for, knowing that those are going to be hubs for this kind of activity. And I'm really pleased we always get a really positive response when we do that. So for anyone who's watching, please do reach out to us, go to our website to find more information on that, because really knowledge around these signs to look out for is key to tackling the issue.
Okay, great, thank you. We've just got a question from Jay on Facebook. He's asked us to clarify something I think perhaps you touched on, Debbie. It said, if you're being paid minimum wage, can you be a victim of exploitation? Can you just explain that more?
Below minimum wage.
Below minimum wage. Okay, so we just want to clarify that. Okay, all right. So hopefully that answers your question, Jay. So not the minimum wage itself, which is obviously set legally, but people that are being paid below that. So that's what we actually intended there. Okay, so just another reminder then to post questions in the comments section, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go or at the end. We've now got a video created by Kent Police that might make you think twice about how businesses themselves can be involved in modern slavery. So we're just going to step back slightly, because we've had a question here from Susan on Facebook, back to the subject of county lines. She's asking what exact kind of help and information can the public give to help inform on these drug dealers? Martin?
I think the key thing here, and it's the same thing with many crime types, is what's out of place. If you've got a house that's being frequented all hours of the day and night, if you've got somebody who is vulnerable, and there's a recent example I've dealt with someone with some learning disabilities who was having people basically visiting his house and taking over and eating all the food. So visitors that are out of place. Antisocial behaviour can be a big sign as well, because not necessarily noise, but a needle starting to be found discarded, or deal bags on the floor, those sorts of things can all help. Suspicious vehicles, exchanges, short exchanges through windows, people that may come into sudden wealth, a multitude of things. But I think the key thing really is, if it doesn't feel right, report it, because going back to what I said earlier on about that brothel warrant I did, they weren't sure what was happening, but it wasn't right, and they were reporting these suspicious ongoings, and it wasn't until we got inside we realised what we were dealing with. And having been on several warrants in my career to do with drug supply, I'll be honest with you, it's those calls from the public, this isn't right, the hours. If it's not right, report it.
Yeah, working on the borough, I see that information come in. And it's, no matter how small that information might be, some of the things that Martin touched on, it helps us to build that picture of intelligence of what's going on at that property or with Definitely. That individual. And then from that picture, which is formed of all those small individual pieces, we can then apply for warrants, we can take action against that property, and ultimately safeguard people as well, particularly if people are being exploited through county lines.
And this is the thing, people say, well, I've reported, or you've not done anything. Having been been in difficult conversations with magistrates trying to get warrants, the more we have, the more we can put in that application, the more likely the courts are likely to say, there's your warrant with your power of entry. So even if you think that it's not massive amounts of information, it's still worth reporting it, because that can be the difference between, yes, there's a power of entry into an address and us either finding a stash house or a victim of exploitation or not. So please, just, you're not wasting anybody's time. Crime Stoppers 101 if you have to. Whichever way you are comfortable reporting it, please do. And likewise, if you're going through Crime Stoppers, you don't even need to give your name, and we can still use that information.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hopefully that's helpful there, Jay. So we're just going to go back to talking about businesses again, and we're just going to think about what ways businesses can take advantage of victims and be involved in modern slavery. I know, Debbie, we've covered it off already in some way, haven't we, talking about the different types of businesses. I suppose from my experience and my point of view, just in addition to the actual working conditions, sometimes it can be about things like, as you said, lack of equipment, but also accommodation that goes with the work that's substandard or overcrowded.
That's right. If you're looking at, for example, if you're looking at farm labour, if the employer makes sure that he's using reputable employment agencies and that the workers directly are getting paid rather than the agency or somebody. If you've got your workers all turning up en masse and somebody speaking for them, there's potentially that's not right. And if the same individually saying, oh, I've got 15 people that can come and work for you, if they're not a registered agency, proper registered agency, the employer needs to be doing some checks around that, and it's the responsibility of that individual to make sure that they're not taking on exploited labour. It's difficult, but there are often signs that it's not quite right. Again, because the wages aren't maybe as high as they should be, or the people still aren't speaking any English. Somebody's talking for them. It's the same types of signs, just manifest itself in different types of exploitation.
Yeah, and I would say I have personal experience of it in relation to agriculture exploitation.
Yeah.
One of the key things for me was very much, as you mentioned, people turning up en masse, but critically being driven by somebody who doesn't know any of their names and actually doesn't even speak the same language as them. So it's really clear what's happening is that minibus is turning up in the morning, people are being told where to get on it, they're being driven somewhere, dropped off, and then they're being picked up by the same individual or somebody else that also can't speak to them, and then dropped off again, which feels very, very strange, doesn't it? In a normal course of life, you wouldn't be driving around people you don't know, and certainly not people that you actually can't speak to. So for me, that's was a really key indicator that something was, really quite wrong there. Okay, so I think we've covered that just in relation to businesses. So we just want to move on now to how you can help as members of the public. Hopefully we've got across the message that we really do depend on you being the eyes and ears in your community and understanding what looks right and what looks wrong, and when something's different than you think it should be. So if you've spotted a sign that somebody might be a victim of modern slavery, what can you do? Well, here's a story from how one girl acted on her suspicions and stepped in to help.
The day started like any other. The 8:36 to Teddington. But soon after, I found myself calling the London Transport Police. So I was getting on the train, but a young woman and man blocked my way. They were jumping on and off the train, but they couldn't decide whether it was the train they were supposed to catch. Just something seemed off. She had a thick Eastern European accent. She couldn't really speak English that well, and he had quite clearly an English-British accent. I asked her where they were trying to go to, and she said that she was trying to go to the doctor. And I asked her who the man that she was with was. He said he was her father, but yeah, that just clearly was not the case.
This is Clapham Junction.
Each time we stopped at a station, he would try to get her to leave the train. And each time this happened, he sort of got more aggravated.
This is New Malden.
Eventually we get to New Malden. This time she stepped off the train, he followed her. I said to follow them off the train. I basically said to her, you don't have to go with this man, like I can come with you, I can call someone for you. Yeah, and it was quite weird because she walked along the platform and stepped back onto the train that we'd just left, one carriage up. So we both followed her, and he turned around and was like to me, why are you following us? And she took advantage in that moment and jumped back off the train. So he sort of caught that in the corner of his eye and tried to get off the train as well. The doors were locked and it ended up just being me and him on the train, staring daggers. My heart was pounding. Then he turned and walked through into the next carriage and was gone. This man had been trafficking this young woman, something which, you know, in my mind I always imagined was sort of happening somewhere far away, or like glamorised in a movie starring Liam Neeson. I never expected it to sort of be on the train on my way to work. Having called the police in the morning, to this day I don't know what happened to that young woman.
So we're going to have a conversation now about what you should do if you see someone you suspect is a victim of modern slavery. Any thoughts, panel?
Well, I would say phone the Modern Slavery Helpline. And
good
they'll
start.
guide you, they'll sort of take the information from you, that will then be passed on to the police force, and they'll be able to investigate the information that you've given.
And I think if it's a then and there incident,
Yeah.
999,
Of course.
Yeah.
because obviously we can go down there and investigate. And then I think that if it's like I've alluded to earlier, it's an ongoing issue, report it. So particularly with antisocial behaviour, drop it into Crime Stoppers anyway. There are multiple people you can report antisocial behaviour to, like your local authority and other people. But if you suspect there's a criminal element to it, please tell the police as well, because things can get lost in translation.
Okay, thank you. So Debbie, I just wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit more about how, obviously we the police work with you, but how your organisation, Justice and Care, and the Navigator programme works with us to tackle modern slavery?
Yeah, definitely, thank you. So the Navigator programme's been around for just coming up to about 3 years, and Surrey Police has had a victim navigator for that period of time. And the very sort of basic element is that the navigator acts as a bridge between the victim of modern slavery and the criminal justice process. So the navigators are embedded within various police forces around the UK, and we're strategically embedded in those forces that see high rates of exploitation and trafficking. We're based not only in the UK but also out in Romania, so I'm looking at source and destination countries, because what we're seeing outside of British nationals being the highest reported stats for the National Referral Mechanism, which is the government's identification system. Romanians are also quite high up there in the identified victims. So we felt that by having a navigator based out in Romania as well, that helps the police in relation to that type of bridge. So the navigator, as I say, acts as that bridge with the police force and the criminal justice process. The navigator is based inside the modern slavery area of the local policing teams, to support them in that investigation, to support the victims. So all of our victims are referred in to us by police. That's where we take our referrals from. We are security cleared, so our vetting from a police perspective is really high, and it works because we are engaged with that investigative process right from the very beginning, so that not only are we supporting that victim on their journey, which is often a really complex journey, not only through the criminal justice process but through the all the other statutory services that are available to them once they're identified as victims of modern day slavery. But we also support the policing teams in providing them with critical advice around victim care for that particular journey, because it's really difficult, and we recognise from a police officer's perspective that, you know, it's hard enough to actually investigate this really complex crime type when you're looking at all the other different avenues that come into that investigation, to then have to worry about, is your victim being supported? And our support ranges from very basic initial fundamental needs, like making sure that they've got toothbrush and shoes and just food and that accommodation from a very first point of view, through to that long-term trauma-informed counselling, to supporting with their asylum process, to keeping them engaged with that criminal justice process so that they can eventually support the police. And what we found by having a navigator involved with that process, statistically, nationally, it's something like about 33% of victims remain engaged with the criminal justice process if they haven't got a victim navigator on board. If there is a victim navigator involved in that journey, it's at 90%, which makes a massive difference, because what that means is then you start getting jobs home from a justice point of view. And that victim then starts to see that, yes, they've had a really difficult journey, but there's been somebody holding their hand through that process, literally, or, virtually, as it were, so that they come out at the other end just much better prepared to manage daily life. And the journey with the navigator is from that very first point of identification right through to when that individual feels that they don't need that support anymore. And quite often the criminal justice process will finish maybe in 6 months, sometimes in 2 years, sometimes in 3 years. But we will remain with that individual for as long as they need, providing that support and care for them for as long as they need.
Thank you, that's great. So we've had quite a few questions that have come forward, so I want to make sure that we can try and answer all of those whilst we're still live. Jay has asked, and I think this is very easy to answer, is there a role for community organisations, networks like clubs, faith groups or care support groups such as food banks in building relationships with those at risk and then maybe reporting to the police? So absolutely, Jay, I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is this is about a community response. This is about people who are involved in different groups that are out there in the community, understanding the signs of exploitation and feeling able to do something about it and come to the police. Without the help of the community, we cannot be everywhere all of the time, and you will know what's normal and feels right to your particular community, and when something feels wrong or something's happening which is unusual and you don't understand why. So absolutely, and through my membership of the Surrey Anti-Slavery Partnership, I have access to lots of partner organisations where we share learning and training and raise awareness, and that does involve some of the other emergency services, but also health and faith groups are included in there as well. So absolutely, it's really really important. So hopefully that covers off that question. So there are a few more questions, so I probably will skip to those and then I will come back to one of the other questions that we've had. So Lisa's asking, how do you safeguard the people that give information?
I'll probably move into that because that's something that I do. It depends on the situation. It depends. The first thing you've got to look at is what it is you're dealing with. What is it? You've got to conduct a threat assessment because there are different levels. Some people can be supported locally within the home. Some people at the more serious end, we're talking relocation, witness protection. It depends on the scale of the exploitation and the threat faced. So, and again, different people, different requirements, different needs. What I would say is, having worked with Justice and Care, certainly for the last couple of years that I've been in Surrey, from an investigator's point of view or detective's point of view, in criminal justice, there's no victim, there's no job, there's no trial. And what I can testify to very, very recently is that continued support, which is tailored to the individuals, certainly helped keep my current investigation ongoing. So I think that, without sort of skipping round the question, there's different things. It could be housing, it could be employment, it could be relocation. It's a very, very wide field, but it would be unique to that individual.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Martin. So what I do want to get onto now is to talk about some of the things that we're actually doing to combat modern slavery. So I'm going to ask James to talk about some of the things that he's done on his district in relation to Op Aident, but what I'll just do is explain that. So several times a year we run something called Operation Aident, which is led by the National Crime Agency and the police. It always focuses on a different type of modern slavery or exploitation, and it involves a period of a couple of weeks of intensification. So that's very focused activity, deliberate activity to try and disrupt or prevent modern slavery crime. It ties in with activity which happens across the rest of Europe, and so it's really crucial for us in terms of bringing all of that work together. It's my job to do that across the southeast region through the group that I chair, but then also to have strategic oversight of that within Surrey. So we recently have had some aidents. We've got one coming up shortly, but James, I'm sure you want to tell us about what you've done recently.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I coordinate the North Surrey's response to Operation Aident, and it touches on a lot of things we've discussed here this evening. So it's around education, prevention work. So we'll do lots of education around the signs to look out for. So whether that be going to taxi companies, fast food outlets, and just giving them some advice about what they can look out for and how to report that to us. We'll also have educational inputs to schools and colleges and universities. And we also like to take a partnership approach when we go into Operation Aident weeks. So the last one we did some joint work with British Transport Police, where both our neighbourhood teams and their officers on the track side would work to identify victims and exploiters using the rail network to facilitate that exploitation. And we'll also go into locations where we think modern slavery is taking place. So, for an example, we know that hotels are a target for exploiters to use. So we not only educate them in signs to spot on what they should do in response to that, but then we'll also test them to see how they're getting on and how they're taking that information on. So on North Surrey's district, we've got a child exploitation team, and they arranged a project with our police cadets where they went to hotels across North Surrey with police cadets as young people and officers in plain clothes going with them and going into hotels and testing that hotel's response to being presented with the circumstances of exploitation. Seeing how they would react to that, and then ultimately feeding that back to that hotel and then management within there to ultimately educate and try and prevent these places being used for exploitation. Yeah. Every Aident week has got a different subject, and we'll tailor our response to that. But ultimately, it's about education and prevention.
Yeah. So far this year, we've done an Operation Aident for child trafficking. That was the last one. Labour, exploitation, and servitude, and then we have one coming up in September, which is around sexual exploitation. So I just wanted to really just answer one other question, I think, which I can probably do fairly briefly, which was to say, what would you say to a victim of modern slavery and how they can get help? I think we've explained a number of different ways you can get help. The Modern Slavery Helpline, by contacting the police, by going to a support agency who can help you link in with the police. But my primary message would be, don't be afraid to come forward. We do understand that many people that are exploited are made to fear figures of authority. That might be based on their experience of law enforcement in their own country. It might be because they've been explained incorrectly what law enforcement is like in this country, whether they'd be likely to be believed. They will very likely have been made to be fearful of coming forward, and sometimes that will be because of things like their immigration status, as well as being in fear and not in control of what's happening to them. So that is what I would say is our primary message, is please do come forward. We can help you. We are trying to help you, and we're working tirelessly with partners across the county and across the country and internationally to try and stop exploitation where we can. So there we go in relation to those questions. I think now all that's left really for me to say is thank you to everyone who's tuned in. We hope you found it useful and it's got you thinking about the role that you can play in spotting modern slavery, and also has given you an insight into what we're doing to tackle this awful but often hidden crime. Now, on a slightly lighter note, which is a very popular feature I know, we're going to move on to our Dog of the Week section, and this is Police Dog Lottie with Sergeant Mike Barnes.
Hi, my name's Sergeant Mike Barnes, the Surrey and Sussex Police Dog Unit. This is Police Dog Lottie. She's a 3.5-year-old German Shepherd. She was bred by the Metropolitan Police and purchased by us, initially to be used as a brood bitch, but we changed our mind with that, and she is now trained as a general purpose police dog, track, search, bite, etc. She's also trained as a firearms support dog, so she'll work with myself alongside the firearms teams when we're deployed. She's pretty calm now, but most of the time she's a bit of a live wire, wants to work, needs to be doing something. Patience is limited, shall we say, with her. Her strengths definitely are her nose work, her ability to track and search, and she will do that all day long if she's allowed to. Won't you? Yes. So a recent job we had, probably a similar day to today, sort of afternoon, similar weather, was a report of a burglary at a residential premises. Similar sort of property to where we're at now. The neighbours had disturbed the intruder and forced them back into the premises. Response officers were called. On their arrival, they've gone straight in and searched the building, and no persons were found. They've contained as best they can the area and waited for our arrival. Once we arrive, the initial thing is to search the immediate area, okay, and then we'll start to look for a track away. I've searched the garden of the building that was attacked. No persons were found in that, but there was a heightened interest by Lottie. She was indicating on a fence at the bottom of the garden. So that's made me decide to search the next door garden in case the person's gone over. As I've entered the garden, I've let her off on a free search from the side gate. She's gone into the garden, and initially she's gone to the bottom of the garden and indicated in the same place on the fence. As I've brought her back up, if you can imagine a single story extension similar to this, with a fence, wooden fence at the top of the house. As we've gone up to the extension, Lottie is showing interest on head up, getting some scent from the roof. So initially my thoughts were that he was on the roof. A short while later, she's gone up to this extension, and although you physically couldn't see any person between the extension and the fence, she's put her head through and indicated the presence of a person. As I've looked through, the person that we were looking for has managed to secrete himself between the fence and the extension. Fortunately, still with the items of property that he stole. Once we've obviously had enough officers there, we've managed to get him out of his predicament, shall we say. and subsequently arrested for dwelling burglary, recovery of the property. Can honestly say, without the presence of the dog there at the time, we wouldn't have located him. You physically couldn't see where he was, you couldn't hear him, you'd have no idea that there was a person in that area. Again, and this is where the strengths of the dog's nose helps us. So all in all, a great find for Lottie, arrest of a burglar and recovery of the property. So that's exactly what they're here for.